Hello Kubernetes people, I'm Nigel Poulton and welcome to another episode of Kubernetes Moment. So for this week's episode, I thought I'd talk about Kubernetes native applications, like what is a Kubernetes native application? And maybe it's one of those things that means different things to different people. So what you're going to get here is what it means to me. Now, let's just take a step back first and say, what is a Kubernetes non-native application or a non-Kubernetes native application? Well, that's just a regular application, right? It's all the applications out there, but we can run them on Kubernetes. And what happens is we will write our application code and we'll package it up as a container image and we'll run it on Kubernetes. And then we sort of dress it all up around with services and ingresses and config maps and secrets and all that kind of jazz, right? But all of that is transparent to the application. So I think a good example would be a config map, right? So your application that's not a Kubernetes native application doesn't need to know anything about Kubernetes, and it doesn't even need to know what a config map is. But we can take the contents of the config map, mount it as a volume into the container, and expose its contents to your application. But all of that is transparent to your application. Your application runs, it consumes the contents of the config map, but it doesn't even know that there is such a thing as a config map. Brilliant. That's how we generally run our applications on Kubernetes. But a Kubernetes native application would be one that understands Kubernetes and talks to the Kubernetes API. So a couple of examples might be, well, if we talk about config maps again, right? So instead of defining a config map and then mounting it into our application as a volume, our application might just talk directly to the config maps API on Kubernetes and get the data that way. And another one might be services, right? So normally with a service, we will assign a floating or a virtual IP address that then maps to all the pods behind it, right? Well, if your application is Kubernetes native, it might just talk directly to the endpoints API to get a list of healthy pods, yeah? So I would say a Kubernetes native application is any application that is written in a way that it understands Kubernetes and all of the objects that Kubernetes exposes, and it understands and talks to the Kubernetes API. Brilliant, okay? One potential drawback is that if you write a Kubernetes native application, and look, I think the name gives it away, right? But you are tightly coupling your application with Kubernetes so that absolutely, it will have to run on Kubernetes. Now, there are pros and there are cons to that, right? So it might operate faster and it might operate smoother with Kubernetes, but you can't run it anywhere that doesn't have Kubernetes. So there we go. That is a Kubernetes native application. I'm Nigel Poulton. Follow me on Twitter and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Love it. A few of you have mentioned the office backdrop going on, right? And I know that things change, we move stuff around, that's my brother working the magic there. But my idea with the office, right, and I've said this to a few people, is yes, of course it's a YouTube channel, but no, I'm not trying to be like a YouTuber. The idea with the office is that I want to surround myself with cool stuff that inspires me around technology and Kubernetes and Docker and cloud and containers and stuff. So the office is filled with sort of tech geek objects, science geek objects, nautical related objects, I like cars, so car related objects, stuff like that. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about some of the items in the office at the end of each episode, right? So this time, this is a brass sextant. Be careful if you're going to Google that, okay? The idea, right, is This is a device that is used, well, was used back in the day with ocean faring and navigation. Basically, you would use the stars to work out how far away objects were, and it would affect your navigation. Now, the reason that it's called a sextant is it comes from the Latin word meaning sixth. So the angle that it measures is 1/6 of a circle. So there you go. This is a brass sextant. It is used, or was used back in the day in nautical times for navigation using the stars, and it comes from the Latin word meaning sixth. Love that.